Did anyone else have parents who said, "Careful what you post online, because once it's out there forever"? By that logic, online preservation should be a historian's paradise, and yet there's probably more lost media nowadays since the Crusaders parted across the Middle East. And this was the unfortunate fate of the earliest webcomics. Nowadays, sites like Webtoon and Netcomics offer a safe place for online comics, but they weren't always around. Since the original internet cartoons were distributed on archaic sites and forums long since shut down, these original comics online have largely been consumed by the endless digital void. And that really sucks, but it's a sad reality of art in general. But if that's where the story ended, then I wouldn't be making a video about it. The thing is, these comics weren't just lost because of rapidly evolving technologies. No, one of the most important early webcomics, and the one that helped popularize the very idea of internet media, was killed thanks in part to Disney and the bloody stranglehold they wanted over their precious rat. And because the phenomena of publishing anything online, including things like fanfiction, was an incredibly new concept. Welcome to a land before AOL, the dawn of dial-up internet, and why you can't and probably never will read the first webcomics ever published. The internet is actually way older than people realize. Would you believe that it actually predates Ghostbusters, Return of the Jedi, and the entire Back to the Future trilogy?
Great Scott!
Well, according to the University System of Georgia, it absolutely does. January 1st, 1983 is considered the official birthday of the internet. Prior to this, the various computer networks did not have a standard way to communicate with each other. So, yeah, 1983. It wasn't exactly the internet we know today. We get upset if a site takes longer than 3 seconds to load a page, while back then it took like 2 hours to load a text-only version of a single newspaper page. Still, this was revolutionary technology at the time. The fact that by 1985, we had the technology to share images was nothing short of a miracle. But this is exactly what artist Eric Milikin did. While some of his work has been lost to time, his life is bizarrely well documented. He's a descendant of Mary Esty, one of the women tried and executed during the Salem witch trials. She and the 7 other victims condemned alongside her were a group known as the 8 Firebrands of Hell, as Reverend Cotton Mathers put it. But before that, she cranked out like 11 children with her husband Isaac. Ouch. And one of those trees would branch out to eventually include Milikin. In a 2006 interview with the Lansing State Journal, he recalls a nightmare he had when he was only about a year and a half old. Like, still potty training age. The morning after, he says he grabbed his crayons to draw the bizarre horror he dreamed, and his morbid comics and drawings only continued to develop through lower grades in middle school, when he created what is commonly called the first webcomic ever published, Witches and Stitches. Fitting for a literal descendant of witches. Though I highly doubt Milikin planned to face the massive legal repercussions and fierce copyright battles over his online cartoons. But, well,
ain't that just the way?
A little bit of a tangent here, definitively calling something the first can be contentious. Could there have been someone who distributed comics online before Milikin? Absolutely. Have they or any information about them survived the test of time? As of posting this video, no. Other contenders for that coveted title of the first online comic include Inspector Dangerfuck. This is where I'd say, oh internet, never change, but clearly it hasn't. And David Farley's Dr. Fun. Although Dr. Fun instead tries to claim ownership of the more specific first regular webcomic, since new episodes were released in a much more structured form. Information regarding Inspector is scarce and unreliable at best. I've seen it placed anywhere between predating Witches and Stitches to 1994. According to the random bits of info I was able to scrounge up, it was created by an artist from Quebec, Canada, only known by the name Erie. It was made using ANSI art, or ANSI art. It was made using ANSI art, which was a primitive, blocky art style made with computer code. ANSI stands for American National Standards Institute, which is an organization that maintains standards in the United States. ANSI art gets its name from its use of ANSI escape codes, defined by the ANSI X364 standard adopted in 1979. Yeah, I have no idea what the hell I just read. I don't know shit about coding and I'm not here to go that deep. Long story short, nowadays we'd probably call it pixel art. A post from the blog Retroactivity sums it up well with a brief demonstration. ANSI artists could use this to make things look like this. Everything 2 user Yam recalls experiencing Erie's art, describing it as comic-y, sometimes mind-wobblingly avant-garde, but always interesting and usually very good. Nothing about the story, nothing about the characters or the titular inspector, only that it certainly did exist. If just basic information is next to impossible to dig up about Inspector, I wouldn't get my hopes up that it could ever be recovered. The internet has changed so much since those early days that most of it simply got left behind, even if this comic was possibly the first of its kind. On the other hand, some of those old first comics from the 80s were able to make it out somewhat unscathed. Dangerfuck isn't just one of the oldest surviving furry webcomics, it's also the oldest surviving webcomic we know of, period. So, I guess that's one weird bragging point to add to the furry fandom TV tropes page. But this video isn't about webcomics you can read, though. It's about webcomics you can't read, for one reason or another. Which brings us back to Milikin's comics. Witches and Stitches wasn't so important because it was the first to go viral. Okay, maybe viral isn't the best word. How many people do you think were online in the mid-80s? Back then, before AOL became the big internet provider of the 20th century, CompuServe was the first major commercial online service in the world. And this is where Milikin distributed Witches and Stitches. The series was a Wizard of Oz parody comic that incorporated multimedia audio and even animation. Looking at examples of Milikin's work over the years, his art ranges from highly stylized to a more traditional sketchy look, reminiscent of something like Invader Zim creator Yonan Vasquez's comic Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. We can assume that Witches and Stitches mimic this unique style. The Comics Journal suggested that even though he was only in middle school, he had some strong far-left political views, and they were expressed in his early comics, saying that, on the far left, Eric Monster Milikin has been posting multimedia comics with political themes for almost as long as the internet has been a thing. It's cited as an early example of a viral phenomenon was read around the world. The Bangalore Mirror said that the comic paved the way for expressing thoughts, rants, and opinions in ways that define just another URL for us today. Milikin redefined what was possible when posting online, at least in terms of notoriety. Nowadays, internet celebrity is absolutely a thing, and I've even talked with some of them, like Pizza Cake Comic and Hollering Elk, which, if you haven't seen my videos with them, you should definitely check them out. I really want to expand this channel to be a home to highlight artists, webcomics, animated web series, and more. And liking and subscribing, all that stuff goes a lot further than you think. Anyway, sorry for the tangent. Milikin obviously didn't go through any established publisher for his comics. They were all self-published by him with the click of a button. Self-publishing these comics let Milikin avoid copyright and censorship. Well, for a time at least. Good luck finding copies of Witches and Stitches to read, because Milikin was threatened with legal action over the comic, a fat ol' lawsuit. And it's all Disney's fault. Okay, so not all Disney's fault. It's not like they're the ones who own the rights to The Wizard of Oz, but they didn't exactly help either. So the party who threatened Milikin with a lawsuit isn't outright stated online, but you can narrow it down to one of 3 parties. Either Warner Bros., who owns the film rights to the 1939 movie, author Frank L. Baum's family, or publisher Riley and Lee. The original Wizard of Oz novel by Frank L. Baum was published under the Copyright Act of 1831. It offered copyright protection for 28 years, plus an additional 14 if renewed. After that, a work enters what's known as the public domain, free for anyone and everyone to use. Had this law not been tampered with, there's no doubt in my mind that we'd still have easy access to Witches and Stitches, because all of the original Baum books, the 1939 film, all of it would have been public domain by the time Milikin posted his comic. Hell, if the law stayed in place, then even freaking Star Wars would be public domain by now. Imagine that timeline. The extension was raised in 1909, but the Copyright Act of 1976 really screwed things up. See, Disney knew the copyright expiration for Mickey Mouse was drawing near, so they started lobbying Congress. Hard. And they got the copyright terms extended to total 75 years. This stopped nearly every Oz property dead in its tracks from becoming public domain. So by the time Milikin posted Witches and Stitches, if his comic used any aspects from the film, the books published after 1910, or anything like that, he would be easy prey for all three possible rights holders. And yeah, if you're going to the comments to ask things like, what about fair use and parody laws? It sounds like the comic was just funny fanfiction. And I definitely agree. I highly doubt Milikin's comics would face legal action nowadays, but online fanfiction wasn't really a concept back in the 80s. There was no AO3 or fanfiction.net or lawyers to specialize in protecting amateur writers. The rights holders simply saw their copyrighted material and went, and need I remind you, Milikin was in middle school. What the hell was he gonna do in a court of law? In the end, he was forced to take the comics down. Copies of Witches and Stitches could still be out there somewhere, but it's more than likely lost media. Still though, it was the spark the internet needed. If not for those early webcomics inspiring countless others to post their works, Webtoon and similar sites might not even exist. And Milikin never stopped creating art. While nowadays he doesn't focus so much on webcomics, he's made films, installations, street art. He just loves making art in any form. As long as he's able to express himself, I think he's happy. So even if we can't go back to revisit those first webcomics ever published, they did exactly what they needed to do. But that's just my take on things. Do you think there's any hope for recovering these comics? Would you like to read them for yourself? Also, if there's any topics about webcomics or internet media you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments. You're the one watching these videos, so I want to do what catches your attention. And with that, until next video, I'll catch you on the flip side. See ya!